Hey, Shalom. This is something that a lot of you may know, but maybe you just need a reminder. All right. When I found out that I was an Israelite in January of 1994, okay, January 1994, we had a whole lot of tapes that was circulating around, tapes and VCR tapes, and Masha was the leader of the school, affectionately called Mo by a lot of brothers, Moshe Kareem, but Masha, okay, he was the leader of the school. Under him, working with him, maintaining the school was Yaquab. This Yaquab's son was Ariel. If you can get a hold of an old tape from like 1991, there's Ariel teaching on there, which at this time, I'm gonna say it like this. At this time, a lot of things that Ariel was saying was more in the spirit. I'm gonna say it like that. So there's a tape with Ariel teaching, and he's breaking down Romans chapter 11. And in breaking down Romans chapter 11, he starts to go into Acts, and it starts talking about Cornelius. And basically, the overall understanding that he gives to us is that if it was not for the Gentiles either having a part or thinking they have a part of the Bible and of salvation, that the Bible would have been destroyed a long time ago, because everybody knew it was a book for the Hebrews. And we have went into slavery under Greece, under Rome, and then under Rome, the Bible was basically taken from us. Remember, they burnt our books like two major times, the Romans and the Babylonians. So Yahweh gave Ezra back the books of the law when he was in coming toward the end of the Babylonian captivity. So the Gentiles basically kept our books, they kept our records. And he talks about, if anybody can get an old breakdown of Ariel going into Romans chapter 11, you'll have a better understanding, not just of Cornelius, but of the Gentiles, in general. Okay. So I'm talking about what was taught back then, over 30 years ago. All right. Like I said, the tape that I was listening to was about from 1991, 1992, something like that. And at the time, it was a fairly recent tape. So in this tape, he goes into the Gentiles and he talks about how the Most High allowed, and he used the scriptures to show it, how the Most High allowed the Gentiles to get the Bible to basically preserve it for us, so that when we woke up, we would have access to our records, because we couldn't keep our records in captivity. So that's one thing that he said. Now, as far as Cornelius, yeah, he did teach that Cornelius is a Gentile. That was the teaching, and that is the understanding. That is the understanding. Now, the leaders of the schools that you now know to be IUIC and GMS, it's the leaders of those schools that first started teaching that Cornelius was a Gentile. Before that, I'm not aware of anybody really teaching it, and they all come from out of the school that Masha has set up around the corner and up the street from 1 West at 464, 126th Street. Last time I was there was probably like spring or summer of 2020, before they moved over into Brooklyn. Last time I was at the spot in Brooklyn was probably 2017. But, I mean, let me say it like this. A lot of the teachings that was going on, people have changed them. They've changed a lot of the teachings, including at the House of David, which is the school that Masha set up after 1 West. They changed a lot of the teachings too. They changed the books that Masha said not to use, the brothers at the house of David, they're using those books now. Cornelius, I'm not Cornelius, but Book of Enoch. You know, we was told, like, everybody knew don't mess with these books, and the Book of Enoch was one of them. They changed the crescent moon. All right, we observed the crescent moon. At no point in our Israelite history, you know, as a nation, we observed the black moon, the dark moon, as the new moon. So that's another thing that was changed. But back to the subject, it was the leaders of what we now know as IUIC and what we now know as GMS, who you know as Apostle Tahar and who you know as Bishop Nathaniel. They are the ones that, to my knowledge, first started teaching, oh, Cornelius is a Gentile. And you see the differences in what they teach now compared to what was taught at the school in the 90s and in the 80s, matter of fact. But you see there's a difference. They've gone into a lot of different doctrines that aren't what they learned. And as far as you brothers wanting to say, oh, well, you teach this about, you know, Cornelius, I ain't gonna rock with you no more, I ain't gonna deal with you no more. You can't be hypocritical like that, because Cornelius don't got nothing to do with my salvation or your salvation. How I keep the Sabbath does have something to do with my salvation and how you keep it. So if you can rock with brothers that's keeping crazy sunrise Sabbaths, Sabbath is Wednesday this month, it's going to be Thursday next month. So if you can rock with brothers where you have a difference that pertaining to your personal salvation issue and get along with that brother, I don't see how you can't get along with a brother that understands Cornelius as the original seasoned leaders and teachers that we all come out of, how they taught it. All right, which brings me to my last point. If you're listening to somebody that's not a seasoned teacher, and by seasoned teachers, I'm giving you a minimum of 20 years. If you got somebody that's been in this for less than 20 years, since, you know, after 2005, and they're trying to change what the original teachings were, I wouldn't listen to that person. Why? Because number one, I don't know who taught them. Are their teachers teaching this? I doubt it. There's nobody that really went to the original school that came switching up doctrine. So my point is this: stop listening to men, stop giving attention and focus to men. I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but I'm saying, like, get your counsel about a doctrine from a seasoned teacher. Brothers that were there, brothers that know, that were taught how to study the scriptures before the internet. You know, I'm talking about brothers like, you know, and I'll call names who I'm talking about, who you need to actually get your final understanding from about certain things. You know, I'm talking about, you know, the Alpha Omega clan. You know, I'm talking about ambassadors of Christ, you know, with Hashar. You know, I'm talking about House of Israel with Zabak. I'm talking about LOZ with Kahan and Shalimar. Okay? I'm talking about the Apostles of New Jerusalem with Mathathua. I'm talking about Judah Mathathua, not Jamaican Mathathua. I'm talking about light-skinned Judah Mathathua. Those are the main ones that I could think of off the top of my head. There's going to be other ones too. There's going to be other teachers you can go to from back then, you know, and this is just a rule of thumb, you know. If you should deal with somebody that sat at the feet of Masha and of Yaquab at some point. If you get somebody that's like second or third generation after that, you're not going to really, you know, get the same foundational teachings. You're going to get something that's different. So again, it was Bishop Nathaniel and Apostle Tahar to the best of my knowledge, from my exposure to what I remembering things, they were the first ones that started teaching, oh, Cornelius is a Gentile. And again, you see how far their teachings have now deviated from the teachings of their original leaders and teachers, Masha and Yaquab, who was set up as the king and as the scribe, and Ariah was set up as the priest. But over the years, Ariah's teachings start to lose focus on the teaching on the parameters set by his father, scribe Yaquab, and the king, King Masha. Over the years, Ariah's teaching started to deviate also to where he started to rock with the Israelite Church of God in Jesus Christ, all right, under Tazadakia, aka Jermaine. All right, so his teaching Ariah's teaching started to deviate over time. But the teaching that he was going into while Masha and Yaquab were alive, I would say that those teachings were probably about, according to the Torah, I would say that they were maybe 85% in line with the Torah. And there's another 15% that I can point out where there were deviations from the Torah itself. But the 85%, of the teachings based on the Torah, even his understanding of what he taught about Cornelius was in line with the Torah. And if you don't understand, when Ariah is talking about Gentiles, the way Ariah's mind works and the way he taught, he's talking about Gentiles in general as nations. He's talking about Moab, Ammon, Ishmael in general. He's not talking about every single member of that nation. So the way he taught was a very Torah-centric way of teaching for the most part. And like I said, 85% of what he's saying, you can line up with the Torah. It's that 15% that may shift away from the Torah slightly. Not really far, not to the far extreme, but 15% from, being around and listening to him and looking at him while he's teaching and listening to his tapes, watching his videos, for the first few years when I came into the truth, I'm talking like all in 90, 94, 95, 96. Listened to his tapes for, several years up and going into the 2000s. Him and other brothers, teaching. So get what you're talking about from a seasoned teacher. I've given you about 3 or 4 schools that I know are good foundational places to begin your journey of learning. And if you're not dealing with them, you're dealing with a splinter in other words, let me say it like this. You have Masha, who sat under the feet of Bibbins. Okay? And now after that, you got, Masha. I'm using Masha as the example, not just the school. I'm looking at the leadership. So you have Masha. Then from Masha, you got another brother that broke off. And then from that brother breaking off, you got another brother breaking off to form a different school. And from this brother breaking off to form a different school, you got another brother breaking off to form a different school that disagrees with these 2 guys before him and disagrees with what was done under Masha's teaching. So what gives this young man the authority to establish a doctrine contrary to what his teacher authorized? You got to understand like that. Ain't about what makes sense sometimes. It's about what don't make sense first. Deal with the spiritual aspect of why is somebody coming with a teaching that's contrary to what was taught and what was understood and what was detailed in the book of Romans chapter 11. I've done several teachings on the book of Romans chapter 11 as a part of my teaching of the Torah on the Sabbath day. And I always refer rather to the teachings in the Torah. What does the Torah say? And that's the source of a lot of misunderstandings for a lot of brothers. Recently, I've heard certain brothers make references to the Torah when they're having different conversations. And then I've heard them say things that go against popular opinion, but that align with the Torah. So I'm seeing a lot of young men make a transition to a more Torah-based doctrine teaching. And then that Torah understanding is influencing their understanding of the rest of the Bible. And I'm seeing this happening, and I'm sitting back quietly watching. And that's one of the main secrets that people need to understand. If you want to understand the Torah, the doctrine of the Bible properly, if you want to understand what the Bible is saying properly, you have to first understand the foundation of the Bible, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, from Genesis all the way to Deuteronomy, from the beginning of the Most High creating until the death. When you understand the Torah, then you understand everything: dietary, holy days, Gentiles, Israelites. You'll have a better understanding of everything: marriage, divorce, childbirth, circumcision, who got to be circumcised, when and why, woman on her cycle, a man, somebody have diabetes, they leaking. You understand all of these things when you understand the Torah first. So you can't just look at people that just came on the scene, less than 20 years ago and haven't really been putting in work and didn't learn from the foundation and trying to break off of that foundation. It ain't about our opinions or our feelings. It's about what thus saith the Lord. What does the Most High say about this in his word? What does he say about not Cornelius, but what does he say about Gentiles? Read the Torah. Read the Torah. If you want to understand the Most High's mind about Gentiles, you're not going to get it by reading a story about a historical event between Peter and Cornelius. That's not where the doctrine of Gentiles is taught. The doctrine of Gentiles and how we deal with them is taught inside the Torah. Go inside the Torah. Read the Torah and see what the Torah says about the Gentiles. Okay? So it was like I said, Bishop Nathaniel and Apostle Tahar, or is it Chief Apostle Tahar? I forget. But they were the first ones that started to teach about the Cornelius was not a Gentile. That Cornelius was not a Gentile. But as far as the leaders of the original school, Bibbins, Yaquab, Masha, their teaching was that Cornelius was a physical, biological, genetic, non-Israelite man. That's what the teaching was. Now, if you can go against that teaching, if you say that they're wrong, then you need to revise and show why and how. And if Cornelius is or isn't a Gentile, you still need to focus on what does the Torah say about the Gentiles, about my conduct, about my behavior, about my habits, about how I need to do certain things in my household, about how I need to eat, how I need to dress, what I need to have on my clothing. So when you look at the Gentiles, these are all of the different aspects of not only the Gentiles, but of different topics in the Torah. That's the answer to all of that's the answer to all of the problems, all of the questions that people have. You can flip through the pages of the New Testament, of the Apocrypha, of the prophets to get an understanding of the Bible, and you can. But the ultimate, what did Hamashiach say? He says that, think not that I will accuse you to the Father. There's one that accuses you, even Moses, in whom you trust. So the words of Moses are going to accuse us of right or of wrong. So you got to understand, how does the words of Moses, the words in the Torah, fit into my understanding of what Ezekiel and Paul are saying? Because Ezekiel and Paul and Moses, they all supposed to be lined up with Yahweh. In the book of the Bible, Yahweh is speaking the most is in the Torah. So if you want to see what Yahweh says and feels about any topic, you can find it inside the Torah. Now, other books, support what the Torah, other books are based upon what the Torah has already established. When I say the Torah, I'm talking about the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's what I'm talking about. All right. So that's the whole bottom line. And we can have a 30-minute or 6-hour discussion, talk, or debate about it. But if you're not coming from the Torah to get your fundamental understanding about Gentiles in general, you're doing yourself a disservice, number one. And number two, if you're trying to twist around the meanings of words in the Hebrew and in the Greek and switching around the meaning of what sentences are, and saying that the sentence doesn't mean what it says because it goes against the doctrine that you were taught or the doctrine that you believe, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're not going to be judged by your belief of right and wrong outside of what the Torah says. So the Torah got to be your definition of right and wrong. If not, then it doesn't matter over here. You're avoiding the immediate, streamlined, quick solution. What does it say about the stranger, about the Gentiles in the book of the law? All right, and then you got to look through other books. You're reading the book of Acts. Start from Acts chapter 1 and read all the way through to the end of the book of Acts. Read the whole book of Acts. And that'll give you a much more well-rounded understanding of the mindset of the people in ancient Israel, in Asia Minor, in that part of the region of the world at that time. You have a much better understanding of the political and the social climate of that time, not just a couple of verses from one chapter. No, read the whole book of Acts to get an overall view, people's mindsets, and see what conversations keep coming up. See what points are being illustrated throughout the whole book, and then you'll get a much more better understanding of a specific point, because you can't isolate what's going on with Cornelius from the other mentions and the other examples of interactions and discussions about Gentiles in the whole book of Acts. So it has to be you'll be better off looking at it cumulatively. Looking at everything all together, looking at what it said through the whole book and seeing the theme to it. And then when you look at the whole book, you'll see, Cornelius was a goyim. He was a goyim. Cornelius was a Gentile. And I don't see how you can really challenge the teachings because of what you're reading in some history book or whatever, which I haven't even looked at the debate, the discussion, the argument about it. I'm just saying most brothers are not on the level of our original teachers. Most brothers aren't on the level of Bibbins or Mashal or Yaquab. And they're picking different doctrines saying that I think it's supposed to be this way. When you start to deviate off of them and what they've taught, you should be able to fill in their shoes, to lead as they led they didn't really change much that came before them. There were some things that they stopped doing, but them things are easy to implement and bring back into practice. So that's who came up with that teaching and who started to push it and popularize it among Hebrew Israelites. Before that, it wasn't even a thing. People knew, Cornelius was a Gentile. It was accepted, it was known, and then that's what it was. So then, like I said, the leaders of the original, the current leaders of the schools known as IUIC and the school known as GMS, their leaders are the ones that said, no, Cornelius is a Gentile. And then after that, no, Cornelius is an Israelite. They came and said, oh no, Cornelius was really he's an Israelite. All right. And after they started teaching that, next thing you know, people talking about touching little girls. People talking about, you can lay with your woman on a Sabbath day. All right. People talking about the new moon is not black no more. People talking about the Sabbath ain't on Friday night no more. So these are gateway drugs. These are all gateway drugs. When you start to contradict what's written before you in black and white, the Bible the Bible may be a puzzle, but it's not a trick book. In other words, it means what it says. And you're not going to get in trouble by the Most High for believing what it says the way it says it. You're going to get in trouble with the Most High by saying it don't mean what it say. It means the opposite of what it say. And I'm going to prove it. I got 13 scriptures over here to prove that it don't mean what it says. You're on shaky ground. I don't care what the doctrine is. You're on very shaky ground when you start to say, well, it says this, but this what it really means. It don't mean what it says. It means what it says, period. And when you start to have a conversation with somebody telling them that what it says in clear words is not what it means in clear words, and this verse over here in this history book explains it, but you're not using that book itself, that chapter, to explain what you're saying in that chapter, you're going off. All right, so don't follow the crowd if the crowd is wrong. The bandwagon is usually wrong. Follow what the scriptures say. It ain't no trick to it. If you die and you die thinking that the word of Yahweh means exactly what it says, that the Bible means exactly what it says, you think the Most High is going to condemn you? Even if you're wrong, you think he's going to play that type of trick with you? Like, well, it didn't mean what was written, so you should have investigated it to know exactly what it meant. So since you didn't investigate, I got a problem with you. How's the Most High going to condemn you if you following what it says? When the tricks are being played by people that have a specific agenda, a specific doctrine that they want to push, and anything in the Bible that goes against that doctrine, they can find a million scriptures, a million different points to justify their conclusion. It's not impossible. This is why we have so many different Israelite organizations, so many different Jewish organizations, so many different Christian organizations, and all of them got different beliefs using the same Bible. They're all using the same Bible. So you can get scriptures, you can show 20 different understandings from one verse. But when you start to go against what it says in black and white, and you teaching people it don't mean what it says, and you got all these scriptures over here, I don't know if the Most High going to be allowing me to do all that type of explaining. When I got to explain to him, well, so-and-so's breakdown said that this is the meaning of this verse. So what did my law say about it? To the law and the testimony. Those that keep the commandments of Yahweh, right? Revelation. So if you're not going by the law and the testimony, the law first. The law first. So if you're not going by the law first, if you can't show what you're saying, your conclusion in the law, you need to back up. Because what you're saying in general about Gentiles and about Cornelius specifically, that concept is not found in the law. Your conclusion is not in the law. In other words, it's a person of a different nation that's trying to keep the commandments. What does the law say about that? What does the law say about it? You see, what does the law say about it? That's what we need to know. Then we move from the law and then we go to the Judges period. What does the book of Judges and Joshua and them say about that? Then we go from there and we move all the way up to Samuel. Then we go into David, Saul and David and Solomon. What did they say? What does the atmosphere of that society say about Goyim? And that's what you got to do. You got to dig into the examples, but your foundation has to be the Torah. And that's the problem with a lot of our people. They don't study the Torah. They don't study the commandments enough. They don't read through it. They don't discuss it and absorb it. It's always a breakdown, a breakdown, a breakdown, a breakdown. Brothers sit back in the class and they do their teaching. It's about a breakdown. Give me this verse, give me that verse, give me that verse. But Yahweh gave us the rules of engagement for the spiritual world to be at peace with us, as far as on his end, how to be at peace with him. And it's called the Torah. And we don't want to read it regularly like Hamashiach read it. The scripture says that he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. The scriptures say that the Israelites from old times would read the Torah every Sabbath day in every city where they lived at. Who's doing that? Who's reading the Torah every Sabbath day in the cities where they are, like the book of Acts talks about people were doing in Israel and in Gentile countries? Once you do that, you'll get a much more a better clean slate to understand other parts of the Bible. So that's all I want to say on that. Shalom.